Tokyo, Japan, spring, 1985. The classroom fell silent as Reiko Fujimura stood before her students. At 60 years old, her hair had gone completely silver, catching the morning light that streamed through the windows of the rebuilt high school. But her eyes still held fire, the kind of fire that comes from seeing the world break apart and then choosing to help put it back together piece by painful piece. In her weathered hand, she held something that made all 40 students lean forward in their seats. A length of chain, rusted, heavy, the metal links stained dark with old blood and 4 decades of memory. Some of the rust flaked off onto her fingers as she held it up, and nobody in that classroom could look away. These students had been born into a Japan that barely remembered the war, born into prosperity and peace, born into a world where the scars had mostly healed, over leaving only the faint marks that people tried not to notice. They knew about the war from textbooks, from careful lectures that danced around the hardest truths, from grandparents who sometimes spoke in fragments but never told the whole story. But today was different. Today their teacher held a piece of the past in her hands, and something in her expression told them that what they were about to hear would change everything. September 15th, 1945. Reiko began, her voice quiet but steady. I arrived in Texas weighing 68 pounds. I had worn these chains for 6 months. Every step I took, they reminded me that I was no longer human, that I was less than an animal, that I deserved whatever suffering came next. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the classroom like dust falling through sunbeams. A girl in the front row raised her hand, her voice tentative. Sensei, but the Americans, didn't they torture you? Wasn't that what happened to prisoners? Reiko looked down at the chain in her hands. Her fingers traced the links, feeling the rough metal, the places where it had rubbed against skin and bone, where it had marked flesh and destroyed the illusion that propaganda could protect anyone from truth. No, she said softly. They did something far more devastating than torture. They treated us like human beings, and that destroyed every lie we had ever been told. The students leaned forward, unable to look away now. The girl in the front row had stopped taking notes. The boy by the window had put down his pencil. Even the ones who usually slept in the back row were awake, alert, waiting. If you want to understand why an American sergeant knelt in the Texas dirt before Japanese prisoners, Reiko continued, then paused. She set the chain down on her desk with a heavy sound that made several students jump, metal hitting wood, final, undeniable, real. My name is Reiko Fujimura, and this is the chain Sergeant Thomas Hayes unlocked for me 40 years ago today. Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas, September 15th, 1945. The heat hit them like a physical wall. 95 degrees of relentless Texas sun turning the military transport truck into an oven on wheels. The canvas covering provided no relief. The metal benches underneath them radiated stored heat like a griddle left too long on the fire. And the chains around their ankles, those cursed chains that had rubbed their skin raw over 6 months of captivity, now burned hot enough to brand. Reiko Fujimura sat wedged between 2 other women, all of them skeletal, hollow-eyed, dressed in torn and filthy uniforms that had once been crisp and clean. Her nursing assistant's outfit had become little more than rags held together by threads and desperate hope. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't dare raise her chained hands to wipe it away. The truck lurched to a stop. Outside, American voices barked orders. The canvas flap was thrown back, flooding the truck bed with blinding sunlight. An American soldier gestured for them to move. One by one, the 43 women shuffled toward the tailgate. The chains around their ankles allowed only tiny steps. Clank, shuffle, clank, shuffle. The sound of imprisonment. A young American soldier stepped forward and offered his hand to help Reiko down. She flinched, expecting a blow, but he just stood there, hand extended, waiting patiently. His face was young, sunburnt with freckles across his nose. Slowly, carefully, Reiko took his hand. His skin was warm, human. He helped her step down, steadying her when the chains made her stumble. "Easy, ma'am," he said in English. The ground beneath her feet was hard-packed Texas dirt, baked solid by the unforgiving sun. Around her, the other women were being helped down with the same unexpected care. No shouting, no violence. Reiko looked around, trying to understand where they were. This was Fort Sam Houston, a massive military installation sprawling across the flat Texas landscape. In every direction, buildings stretched toward the horizon, not bombed-out ruins like Manila. These buildings stood intact, freshly painted, maintained. American flags snapped in the hot wind. Mesquite trees dotted the landscape. The sky overhead was a blue so pure and deep it seemed impossible. No smoke, no ash, just endless, perfect blue. And then the smell hit her, mesquite smoke, rich and woody. And underneath that, the unmistakable scent of grilling meat, barbecue. Someone somewhere on this base was cooking food, real food. The smell was so overwhelming that several women actually swayed on their feet. One woman next to Reiko made a small sound in her throat, half sob, half moan. Country music drifted from a distant radio. Somewhere an American soldier laughed. The ordinary sounds of people going about their day, as if the world hadn't just torn itself apart in the Pacific. It was all wrong. This was supposed to be hell. But instead, it looked like life. Normal, mundane, incomprehensibly normal life. Sumiko Ishikawa, the oldest among them at 45, stood next to Reiko. Her face was carved from stone. During the voyage from the Philippines, she had been their rock. "Do not show weakness," Sumiko had told them over and over. "Do not cry. Die with dignity if you must, but give them nothing." Now Sumiko's mask showed the first hairline cracks of confusion. Because this place, these Americans, they didn't fit the narrative. They didn't look like devils. They looked like men, tired men, young men. Men who probably wanted to go home just as much as the prisoners did. The youngest among them, Chio Hayashi, was barely 19 years old. Tears already streamed down her face, silent and unstoppable. She had been crying on and off for months, ever since Manila fell. An older sergeant stepped forward from the line of American soldiers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his early 40s. His face was weathered like old leather, tanned dark by years under the Texas sun. Gray streaked his temples, deep lines framed his eyes and mouth, the kind of lines that came from squinting against harsh light and carrying heavy burdens for so long that your body started to reshape itself around the weight. Sergeant Thomas Hayes stopped a few feet in front of the group. He looked at them, really looked at them. And something shifted in his expression, not anger, not hatred. Something that looked like recognition, like grief. He turned to the younger soldier and said something in English. Then he reached down to his belt and pulled out a ring of keys. The metal jangled as he moved forward toward the first woman in line. Sumiko stood frozen as Hayes approached. She braced herself for whatever was coming. Thomas Hayes knelt down in the Texas dirt. The sound of 43 women gasping was like wind through dry leaves. Sumiko's eyes widened. Chio's crying stopped mid-sob. Reiko felt her breath catch in her throat. Why would an American soldier kneel before a Japanese prisoner? Hayes inserted a key into the lock on Sumiko's ankle shackles. The lock was old, rusted from months of salt water and sweat. It resisted at first. He had to work at it, turning the key, carefully applying steady pressure. Click. The sound was small, almost insignificant. But in the silence of that Texas afternoon, it rang out like a gunshot, like a declaration, like the end of one world and the beginning of another. The shackles fell away from Sumiko's ankles, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. The skin underneath was raw, bleeding in places, bruised purple and black. Hayes stood, moved to the next woman, knelt again. Another lock, another click, another chain falling. One by one, with patient, methodical care, he worked his way down the line. When Hayes reached Chio, the young woman flinched violently. Hayes paused, his weathered face softening. "Easy, miss. Not gonna hurt you." He worked her lock. It stuck, more stubborn than the others. Hayes tried once, the key refusing to turn. He adjusted his grip. Tried again. On the third attempt, something gave way. Click. Chio's chains fell away. The girl collapsed to her knees, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Reiko was next in line. He knelt before her, and for the first time she saw his face up close. The lines were deeper than she'd thought. The eyes were a pale blue, startling against his sun-darkened skin. But it was the grief in those eyes that struck her. This was a man who knew loss. Hayes worked her lock. It was stubborn. The key went in, but the mechanism refused to cooperate. He muttered something in English, frustration creeping into his voice. Not frustration at her, frustration at the lock, at the chains themselves. Click. The weight disappeared from Reiko's ankles so suddenly she actually stumbled. Hayes reached out to steady her, his hand on her elbow. The touch was brief, professional, but gentle. Their eyes met for just a second. In that moment, Reiko saw something in his face, something that looked like recognition, like he saw not an enemy, but a person. It took 15 minutes to free all 43 of them. When the last lock clicked open, Hayes gathered all the chains into a heavy bundle. He faced the women. 43 Japanese prisoners, enemies of his country. Hayes spoke. His Japanese was halting, heavily accented, clearly memorized, but the words were unmistakable. "You are prisoners of war, but you are human beings. You are not animals. In Texas, we don't treat people like animals, not even our enemies." The words hung in the scorching Texas air, like a physical presence. Several women gasped. Sumiko's stone mask cracked wide open. Chio began to sob again, but differently now. Reiko felt something inside her chest shatter, a wall she had built to protect herself. Because this unexpected kindness, this recognition of their humanity by the very people who had every right to deny it, this was more terrifying than any torture could have been. Torture would have confirmed what they had been told. Torture would have made sense. But kindness, mercy, humanity extended to enemies that destroyed everything they thought they knew. A young private approached Hayes. The sergeant nodded, then gestured towards several waiting trucks with bench seats and shade covers. But before they could move, a voice cut through the heat like a knife. "Sergeant Hayes." A man in an officer's uniform approached, maybe 50 years old. Hard face, harder eyes. Captain Frank Morrison stopped a few feet away. He looked at the freed prisoners, at the chains in Hayes's hands. His jaw clenched tight. "A word, Sergeant. Now." The two men moved away, but their voices carried. The prisoners couldn't understand the English, but they could hear the tension. "You're coddling the enemy. These women's countrymen killed American boys. They're nurses, sir. They saved lives. You think that matters? Your boy died at Iwo Jima, didn't he? Almost 6 months ago." Hayes went very still. "Yes, sir. And you're going to stand there and tell me We should show mercy to the people who killed him. I'm going to honor what my son believed in. He died fighting for American values. I won't dishonor his memory by abandoning them." Morrison shook his head, disgust clear. "I've submitted a report to command about your methods. We'll see if your principles survive scrutiny, Sergeant." He walked away, his back rigid. The women were loaded onto trucks. Without chains, they could actually walk normally for the first time in months. But the sensation was so alien that many stumbled. Their bodies had forgotten what free movement felt like. The trucks drove through the sprawling base. Buildings stood intact. Grass grew green despite the Texas heat. Gardens bloomed with flowers. Everything spoke of organization, abundance, power. This was not a nation on the brink of collapse. They pulled up to a large whitewashed building with a red cross painted on the side, a medical facility. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and soap. It was impossibly clean. American nurses in crisp white uniforms waited smiling. One spoke halting Japanese. "Welcome. We are here to help you." They were taken into examination rooms. Reiko's turn came. A doctor waited. A woman in her late 30s with kind eyes. A female doctor. In Japan, military doctors were always men. Dr. Sarah Mitchell examined Reiko's ribs, noting bruises with concern. When she touched a tender spot, Reiko winced. The doctor immediately pulled back. "I'm sorry. I know it hurts. I'll be more careful." An apology to a prisoner, to an enemy. The doctor cleaned an infected wound with careful attention, wrapped it in clean bandages, added antibiotic ointment. Precious medical supplies being used on a Japanese prisoner. "You're very brave. This must be terrifying, but you're safe now, I promise." After examinations came showers, individual stalls, each curtained for privacy. Privacy. That concept had ceased to exist months ago. Each woman received supplies, real soap that smelled like lavender, shampoo with honey fragrance, thick towels, and hot water. Reiko entered her stall and turned the tap, half expecting cold water. Instead, steam began to rise almost immediately. The water ran hot, actually genuinely hot. She stepped under the stream and felt 40 years of memories compress into this single moment. This was when everything changed. This was when the last of her defenses crumbled. The hot water hit her filthy skin, and she began to cry. Not quiet tears, huge racking sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest, from a place she had locked away to survive. The water ran brown at her feet, washing away 6 months of dirt and sweat and fear. She scrubbed her skin with the lavender soap until it turned pink. The scent of lavender filled the space. Not harsh chemicals, but flowers. She shampooed her hair once, twice, 3 times. The honey-scented foam ran through her fingers. She watched the tangles loosen, watched her hair transform from matted rope back into something human. Around her she could hear similar sounds, women crying as they washed, women laughing with a slightly hysterical edge, women discovering what it meant to be reminded that they were human beings. When Reiko emerged wrapped in a soft towel, she felt reborn, scoured clean, not just physically but spiritually. Waiting for them were clothes, simple cotton dresses, plain but clean and whole. There were undergarments, thick socks, canvas shoes that actually fit. Reiko dressed and caught sight of herself in a small mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The face was still hollow cheeks, still sunken. But the skin was clean, the hair was free of tangles. The eyes looked almost human again. One of the nurses approached, smiled, and gave Reiko a gentle pat on the shoulder. The touch said, "You're okay now. You're safe." But 40 years later, Reiko would tell her students the truth, that in that moment she had been more terrified than at any point during captivity, because kindness from the enemy meant that everything she had been taught might be a lie. The dining hall was nothing like the cramped spaces where they had been fed scraps. This was a real cafeteria with long wooden tables and benches that gleamed under electric lights. Windows ran along both sides. The room was cool air-conditioned. American soldiers sat at other tables, eating their own meals, talking in normal tones. Some glanced at the Japanese women as they entered, but without malice. A few even nodded in greeting. The women lined up. They were handed actual metal trays with divided sections. And then they saw the food. Reiko stopped moving, causing a backup in the line. She couldn't process what she was seeing. The American woman serving a Mexican Texan in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair, smiled and gestured for Reiko to move forward. "Take what you want, mija. There's plenty." Plenty. That word. In 6 months, Reiko had forgotten what plenty meant. The steam rising from the serving dishes carried smells so overwhelming that several women swayed on their feet. On the serving line was a feast. Slow-smoked brisket, the centerpiece of Texas barbecue, sat in thick slices that fell apart at the touch. The meat had been cooked for 16 hours over oak wood, developing a bark so dark it was almost black, crispy, and savory and glistening with rendered fat. The smoke smell alone was enough to make Reiko's knees weak. Pinto beans cooked with chunks of bacon, brown sugar, and onions until they were soft and rich. Cornbread golden and still warm with honey butter already melting on top. Grilled corn on the cob, each kernel charred, slightly brushed with butter and sprinkled with salt. Coleslaw creamy and tangy, made with fresh cabbage. White rice. Dinner rolls soft as clouds, gravy, and, at the end, pitchers of iced sweet tea. The woman serving Mrs. Elena Martinez didn't just put food on the plates, she loaded them. 3 thick slices of brisket, a huge scoop of beans, 2 pieces of cornbread, an ear of corn, coleslaw, rice, a roll. "Eat up, honey, you need it." Reiko carried her impossibly full tray to a table near the back. For a long moment, no one ate. 43 women sat staring at their plates, unable to understand how their enemy could have this much food, while Japan starved. Chio was the first to break. She looked down at her brisket and began to cry again. Tears dropped onto her rice. Reiko took a small bite of the smoked meat. The taste exploded through her senses like a physical blow, smoky, tender, rich with fat and seasoning and 16 hours of patient cooking. It was so overwhelmingly delicious that she had to stop, close her eyes, force herself not to cry. She had forgotten what real food tasted like, forgotten flavors meant to bring joy, not just sustain life. Around the table, the women began to eat, slowly at first, then faster, hunger overwhelming their caution, then desperately stuffing food into their mouths. One older woman ate too quickly. Her stomach rebelled. She turned and vomited onto the floor. Mrs. Martinez came over with a mop and bucket cleaned up without reproach, brought the woman water and patted her shoulder. "Slower, mija. Your stomach needs time." Reiko bit into a peach. Texas peaches, sweet as candy and dripping with juice. The taste transported her instantly back to childhood, to the orchard near her village, to autumn festivals where her mother would make pie. The memory physically hurt. She thought of her mother, her 2 younger sisters, somewhere in Japan. Were they alive? Were they eating tree bark, while their daughter sat in an American cafeteria eating brisket and peaches? The guilt crashed over her like a wave. She set down the peach, unable to take another bite. We are alive, we are fed, we are safe, and our families suffer unimaginable horrors. The contradiction was unbearable. After the meal, they were taken to their barracks. Reiko expected concrete floors, no privacy, no comfort. But the building was clean, the wooden floor had been swept, windows lined both sides, and running down the center were beds, real beds, with mattresses, with pillows, with thick wool blankets. The women stopped in the doorway staring. Chio gasped. There were 43 beds, one for each woman, individual beds, each with its own small footlocker. In one corner stood a heating and cooling unit humming softly. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, and at the far end was a bathroom. Toilets that flushed, sinks with running water. Reiko lay back on her assigned bed. Her head sank into the pillow. She stared at the ceiling and felt her body begin to shake from the breaking of every certainty she had held. This was not how you treated enemies. And if this was a lie, what else had been a lie? The days took on a rhythm. Wake at 6 to a bugle. Breakfast in the dining hall. Eggs and bacon and toast and coffee. Real coffee, hot and strong. Then work assignments. Light work. Kitchen duty, helping Mrs. Martinez. Laundry. Garden work. No one was beaten for working slowly. No one was starved for making mistakes. The American soldiers were professional, sometimes even kind. For 2 weeks, life fell into this pattern. The women learned bits of English. Some of the younger guards tried to learn Japanese phrases, their pronunciation so terrible it made the women laugh. Private James Rodriguez was particularly determined. Every morning he would greet them with an enthusiastic attempt at good morning in Japanese, his pronunciation so mangled it became a running joke. But Captain Morrison was watching, and he was building a case. Reiko was assigned to help Mrs. Martinez in the kitchen. The older woman spoke no Japanese, and Reiko's English was almost non-existent, but they managed to communicate through gestures and smiles. One afternoon, 13 days after their arrival, Miss Martinez decided to teach Reiko how to make tortillas. She pulled out a bowl of masa and demonstrated the technique. Press it between your palms, not too thin or it would tear, not too thick or it would be doughy. Reiko tried. Her first attempt was uneven. Mrs. Martinez laughed gently and showed her again. The second attempt was better. The third was almost perfect. They watched together as it cooked on the hot griddle. Small bubbles appeared. Brown spots developed. The sizzle was soft, intimate. Mrs. Martinez flipped it, cooked the other side, then buttered it while still hot. The butter melted immediately, filling the kitchen with a smell that made Reiko's mouth water. Mrs. Martinez handed the tortilla to Reiko to taste. Reiko bit into it. The flavor was simple but perfect. Corn and butter and heat. The taste of something made with care. Mrs. Martinez watched her eat, smiling. Then her expression shifted, became more serious. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a photograph. A young man in a navy uniform, handsome, with Mrs. Martinez's eyes and smile, maybe 25 years old. Mi esposo, my husband. She pointed to the photograph, then made a gesture like an explosion. December 7th, Pearl Harbor. Reiko froze the tortilla halfway to her mouth. Mrs. Martinez's husband had died at Pearl Harbor, killed by Japanese forces 4 years ago, the attack that started this whole war. And here she was, this widow, teaching a Japanese prisoner how to make tortillas, being kind to someone whose nation had killed the man she loved. Reiko wanted to apologize, but she had no words. How do you apologize for a war? Instead, she bowed. Deeply. Formally. The kind of bow reserved for profound respect or profound apology. She held it for a long moment, eyes closed. When she straightened, Mrs. Martinez was crying, but she was also smiling. She reached out and touched Reiko's shoulder, squeezed gently, said something in Spanish. Then she spoke in English slowly and carefully. War is enemy, not you, not me. War. And Reiko understood in that moment something that would take years to fully process. The enemy wasn't Japanese or American. The enemy was war itself. The enemy was the system that turned ordinary people into killers and victims. The enemy was the lie that some lives mattered less than others. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Mrs. Martinez patted her shoulder once more, then handed her another ball of dough. Again, practice makes perfect. So they went back to making tortillas. Two women on opposite sides of a war finding common ground in the simple act of creating food together. But Captain Morrison had been watching from the doorway, had seen the moment of connection, had seen the photograph, had seen two women, enemy and widow, working together as if the war didn't matter. His jaw clenched. He turned and walked away, his mind already forming the words he would write in his report. That evening, Morrison found Hayes outside the prisoner barracks. The sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. "Sergeant Hayes." Morrison's voice was tight with controlled anger. Hayes turned face neutral but wary. "Sir, this isn't a social club. These are enemy combatants. I just watched one of them laughing in the kitchen with Mrs. Martinez. They're learning useful skills, sir, and Mrs. Martinez volunteered. Mrs. Martinez lost her husband to these people." Morrison stepped closer, voice dropping low. "You're too close to this, Hayes. Your grief over your boy is making you soft. I survived Bataan. 70 miles. 12,000 Americans started that march. 1,000 died before we even reached Camp O'Donnell. 1,500 more died in the first month." His voice was cold, technical, not breaking, but precise. "I weighed 175 pounds when the march started, 118 when it ended, lost 57 pounds in 9 days. Morrison continued, "Every time I see those Japanese women eating brisket, I see my platoon dying in the dirt. It's not anger, it's mathematics. They eat, my men died. The equation doesn't balance." Hayes replied quietly, "Those women didn't kill your platoon, Frank. They weren't at Bataan. They're nurses who tried to save lives. If we punish innocents for the crimes of their countrymen, we become what we're fighting against. And all those men at Bataan died for nothing." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Then, "I've submitted a report to command about fraternization between staff and prisoners, about security protocols being ignored. They'll be reviewing everything, Sergeant. Every decision you've made, every mercy you've shown." The next morning, Commander Wilson called Hayes into his office. He was a good man, a career officer who had seen too much war. "Close the door, Sergeant." Hayes stood at attention. "Captain Morrison has submitted a detailed report. Serious allegations, fraternization, security protocols ignored, prisoners given privileges beyond regulations." Wilson leaned forward. "I know what you're trying to do. I know about David, about the promise you made him. But if you can't prove Morrison wrong, I'll have no choice but to transfer these prisoners to a higher security facility in New Mexico, and you'll be removed from command pending full review. You have 48 hours to provide evidence contradicting Morrison's allegations, that security protocols are followed, no inappropriate fraternization, resources not misused. 48 hours, sir. Starting now." That night, Private Rodriguez found Reiko in the barracks, sitting on her bed with a notebook. Miss Thompson, the volunteer English teacher, had given it to her weeks ago. Reiko had been filling it with careful English sentences. Rodriguez's face was serious, lacking his usual smile. "Reiko, I need to tell you something about Sergeant Hayes." He explained. Morrison was trying to get Hayes in trouble, said prisoners were being treated too well. Commander gave Hayes 48 hours to prove Morrison wrong. If he couldn't, they'd all be transferred. New Mexico, higher security facility. Reiko felt the blood drain from her face. Higher security meant chains again, meant cold and hunger, and the loss of everything they had found here. I write statement. In English. Tell truth. Reiko, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Sergeant Hayes give us humanity. Now I help him. She spent the entire night writing. The words came slowly at first, her English vocabulary limited, her grammar uncertain, but she had something to say. By dawn, she had 3 pages. To Commander Wilson, my name is Reiko Fujimura. I am 20 years old. I am nursing assistant from Tokyo. I was captured in Manila when city fell to American forces. For 6 months, I wore chains. Sergeant Thomas Hayes did something I never expected. He knelt in Texas dirt and unlocked our chains. He said, "You are human beings, not animals." He kept promise to his son David, who died at Iwo Jima. David asked his father to choose mercy over revenge. We are not planning escape. We are not resisting. We talk about our families in Japan. We worry they are starving while we are fed. Captain Morrison heard us speaking Japanese and thought we were planning bad things. But we only spoke of missing our mothers, our sisters, our homes. We are grateful for treatment here. We ask for fair hearing. We ask for truth. Below her signature, she drew a line. Then she woke Sumiko. I need all women to sign this. We need to show we stand together, that we tell truth. By breakfast, all 43 women had added their signatures. She brought the statement to Hayes's office that morning. He was at his desk, surrounded by paperwork, his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked up when she knocked, surprise crossing his features. I write for you. Truth about Captain Morrison. All women sign. Hayes took the papers, his hands gentle. He read slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like gratitude mixed with pain. Reiko, you didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. You give us humanity. Now I give truth. What Reiko didn't know was that Hayes already had another piece of evidence. Elena Martinez had been waiting outside his office when Reiko left. The older woman was holding an envelope. Her hands were shaking slightly. Sergeant Hayes, I need to tell Commander Wilson something. She opened the envelope, pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, worn soft from being read countless times over 4 years. My husband, he write me letter before he die, at Pearl Harbor. His ship was sinking, and he knew he wouldn't make it. But he found time to write me words. Her voice broke. He say, Elena, if I die, don't let my death create more death. Forgive. Please forgive. She explained what she had witnessed, explained how she had been in the kitchen when Morrison overheard the Japanese women talking, how she had understood their tone, their body language, even if she didn't understand the words. They were talking about families, about worry and fear and homesickness, not about escape, not about resistance. I tell Commander Wilson truth. Captain Morrison, he is good man with broken heart, but broken heart make bad judgment sometimes, make him see enemies when he should see people. That afternoon, Commander Wilson called Morrison and Hayes to his office. Elena was there too, standing quietly in the corner, her husband's letter clutched in her hands. Wilson laid out the evidence, Reiko's statement with 43 signatures, Elena's eyewitness testimony, the lack of any actual security breach. Captain Morrison, your allegations appear to be based on misunderstanding. The prisoners were not planning escape. Mrs. Martinez was present and can testify. Morrison turned on her. You lost your husband at Pearl Harbor. How can you defend them? Elena said simply, because my husband asked me to. Because he believed forgiveness is stronger than revenge. And I think maybe you need someone to forgive you too, Captain. For what you saw, for what you could not stop. The room went silent. Morrison's face showed something breaking. You don't understand what they did at Bataan. The death march. I watched my men die. Every time I see those Japanese women comfortable and fed, I see my platoon dying in the dirt, and it feels like betrayal. Hayes spoke gently. Frank, those women didn't kill your platoon. They're nurses who tried to save lives. It doesn't matter. It does, because if we punish innocents for the crimes of their countrymen, we've lost. We've become what we're fighting against. And all those men at Bataan died for nothing, Wilson spoke. Wilson, Captain Morrison, I'm ordering you to report for psychological evaluation. You've served honorably, but you need help. Sergeant Hayes, your protocols are approved. The prisoners remain under your command. This matter is closed. Morrison stood slowly. At the door he paused and turned to Hayes. Your son was a better man than I'll ever be, he said quietly. Then he was gone. 2 weeks later, Hayes and his wife, Sarah, stood in their modest living room looking at a small wooden box on the coffee table. Inside were David's dog tags. We should give them to her, Sarah said softly. To Reiko, the Japanese girl who's David's age. She's leaving in June, going back to Japan. She should take David with her, not the metal, but what it means. The next day, Hayes called Reiko to his office. He had the dog tags in his pocket. He had worn them since the day the telegram arrived, March 27th, 1945. Miss Fujimura, your English has gotten very good. Miss Thompson is good teacher. When I go back to Japan, I want to tell people about America, about what I learn here, about mercy and principles. But my English must be good to teach these things. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Hayes pulled the dog tags from his pocket. These belong to my son David. He died at Iwo Jima, 19 years old, killed by Japanese forces. Reiko's face went pale. Sergeant Hayes, I am so sorry. I know and I believe you, but that's not why I'm telling you. Hayes held out the tags. I want you to have these, to take them back to Japan with you, to help you remember what David believed in, what he died for. I cannot. This is your son, your only memory. No, my memory of David is in here. Hayes touched his chest. These are just metal, but they could be something more. They could be a bridge, a reminder that an American boy died believing in mercy. I want you to take that message home, to teach it, to make sure David's death meant something. Reiko's hands shook as she took the dog tags. She could read the embossed letters, Private David Hayes, USMC. Born June 15th, 1925. Died March 26th, 1945. I promise I tell everyone about David, about you, about mercy being stronger than revenge. That's all I ask. But there's one more thing. My wife Sarah and I are having a memorial service for David in 2 weeks. We'd like you to come, all of you, all 43 women. Reiko looked up sharply. Sir, we are Japanese. Your son died fighting us. Why would you want us at his memorial? Because David believed in reconciliation, believed that after war ends, we have to find a way to be human again. Sarah lost her first husband at Pearl Harbor. She's got every reason to hate Japanese people, but she wants to do this, wants to honor David by choosing forgiveness over bitterness. We do not deserve this. None of us deserve mercy, Miss Fujimura. That's what makes it mercy. Sunday morning came bright and clear. The 43 women dressed in their simple cotton dresses and walked to the base chapel. The chapel was small, whitewashed, with a simple wooden cross at the front. American soldiers and officers filled most of the pews. They turned as the Japanese women entered. Near the front sat Sarah Hayes, mid-40s with graying brown hair, pulled back in a neat bun. Her face showed the kind of beauty that comes from strength weathered by sorrow. When Sarah saw the Japanese women, something crossed her face. Recognition. The recognition of shared grief. The women sat together in the back pews, but Chaplain O'Brien gestured for them to move forward. There was room near the front. They were guests, not intruders. The service began simply. Chaplain O'Brien spoke about David. Then Sarah stood. She walked to the front, moving with careful dignity. She pulled a photograph from her pocket. David in his marine dress blues. She held it up so everyone could see. "This is my son, Private David Thomas Hayes, born June 15th, 1925. Died March 26, 1945, on the third day of the Battle of Iwo Jima. He was 19 years old." She paused, looking at the photograph. "When David enlisted, I was angry. Angry at the Japanese for Pearl Harbor. Angry at the war for taking my first husband. Angry that my boy wanted to go fight when I'd already lost so much." She set the photo on a small table next to a folded American flag and David's Purple Heart. But David wasn't angry. He was sad. Sad that the world had come to this. Sad that young men had to die for the mistakes of old men. Sad that hate had become so easy and forgiveness so hard. Sarah unfolded a piece of paper worn soft from being read many times. "Before he left, David wrote me a letter. I'd like to read part of it." Her voice wavered as she read, "Mom, I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but I need you to promise me something. When this is over, whether I come home or not, don't let this war make you bitter. Don't let my death, if I die, create more death. The Japanese soldiers I might fight, they're somebody's sons too, somebody's brothers. Maybe if we can remember that, maybe if we can see each other as people instead of enemies, maybe this will be the last war. Promise me you'll try, Mum. Promise me you'll forgive." Sarah folded the letter carefully. When she looked up, tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained clear. "I'm trying to keep that promise. It's the hardest thing I've ever done." She looked directly at the Japanese women. "You're not my son's killers. You're nurses who tried to save lives. You're daughters and sisters and mothers just like me. War took my David. War took your homes. We're all victims of the same evil." She picked up David's photograph again, showed it to them. "This is who I lost. Remember him, not as the enemy, but as someone who believed in mercy, someone who wanted his death to mean something more than just more hatred." Her voice broke for the first time. "Someone who would want me to do what I'm doing now, seeing your humanity, choosing forgiveness over revenge, trying to build something better from all this suffering." The chapel was silent, except for the sound of crying, not just from the Japanese women, from the American soldiers too. Reiko stood up. She didn't plan it. She simply stood David's dog tags hanging beneath her dress and walked forward. She stopped in front of Sarah. For a moment they just looked at each other. Two women divided by everything except the one thing that mattered: loss, love, the desperate hope that maybe something good could come from so much pain. Reiko bowed deeply, profoundly. When she straightened, she pulled the dog tags from beneath her dress, held them in her palm. Her English came halting but clear. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband, Sergeant Hayes, he give me these, your son's tags. He say I should remember, should tell people in Japan about David, about mercy, about choosing humanity over hate." Her voice shook, but she continued, "I make promise. I promise I tell everyone. I teach Japanese children about American boy who die believing forgiveness better than revenge. I teach them about father who honor son through kindness to enemy. I teach them about mother who choose mercy when hate would be easier." She held out the dog tags, offering them back. "I am sorry, so sorry. Cannot bring back your son. cannot change what Japan did. But I promise I make his death mean something. I help build world he wanted. World where enemies can become friends, where mercy is stronger than victory. Sarah looked at the dog tags in Reiko's palm. Then slowly she reached out and closed Reiko's fingers back around them. You keep those. Tom was right to give them to you. David would want you to have them. Then Sarah did something that would be remembered by everyone in that chapel for the rest of their lives. She stepped forward and embraced Reiko, pulled this young Japanese woman into her arms and held her while they both cried. "We've all lost too much," Sarah whispered. "Let's not lose our humanity too." Around the chapel, the sound of people choosing to heal instead of hate. June 1946. Tokyo Bay. Reiko stood on deck as the ship entered the bay. What she saw stole her breath. Devastation. Complete and utter devastation. The great city was gone. In its place, endless fields of rubble. Makeshift shacks dotted the ruins. Smoke still rose from some areas. People moved through the destruction like ghosts. The dock was crowded with people searching for loved ones, desperate faces, some holding photographs, others just hoping. Reiko scanned the crowd, her heart pounding. There in the back, a woman so thin she was barely recognizable, but Reiko knew that face. "Mother!" She ran. They collided. Reiko felt her mother's bones through the rags she wore, felt how light she was, how fragile. "You're alive. That's all that matters." That night in the tiny shelter, her family now called home, Reiko tried to explain, tried to tell her mother where she had been, what she had experienced. Her mother listened, face carved from stone. When Reiko finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. "They were kind to you." "Yes." "Why?" Reiko pulled out the dog tags, showed them to her mother in the dim light of a single candle. This was David Hayes, American Marine, 19 years old, killed at Iwo Jima by Japanese forces. His father was my jailer. His father chose mercy over revenge because David made him promise to stay human. Her mother held the tags reverently, reading the engraved name with tears in her eyes. "Your father believed the propaganda died for lies in Manchuria. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you learned the truth, even though it hurts." She pulled Reiko close. "Now you have a mission. You honor this David. You honor his father. You make their choice mean something. You help us rebuild on truth instead of more lies." And Reiko did. Over the next months and years, as Japan slowly clawed its way back from destruction, Reiko became a voice for uncomfortable truths. She found work at a makeshift clinic established by American occupation forces. Her English, her nursing skills, her unique perspective made her valuable. By 1950, Reiko had become a teacher, English and American history at a rebuilt Tokyo high school. She told her students things no textbook would say, about Japanese war crimes, about American mercy, about the Geneva Convention and human rights, and the principles that separated civilization from barbarism. Years passed. Japan transformed from ruins to economic power. Reiko kept teaching, kept telling the truth, kept holding up those dog tags and explaining what they meant. In 1975, a letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky, but the return address made Reiko's heart stop. San Antonio, Texas. Thomas Hayes had died the previous year, peaceful in his sleep. His last words had been, "I kept my promise to David." Sarah was inviting Reiko to visit, to come back, to see what had been built from all that pain. Reiko went. She flew to America for the first time since leaving as a prisoner 30 years before. Sarah met her at the airport. Both women were grey now, aged by decades and loss. They embraced like the old friends they had somehow become. They visited Hayes's grave, San Antonio National Cemetery. The headstone was simple. Thomas Hayes, 1903 to 1974, Sergeant, U.S. Army. I kept my promise. Reiko placed flowers on the grave. He gave me these, she said, pulling out David's dog tags. After 30 years, I've carried them every day. Keep them, Sarah said. That's where they belong. That's how David lives on. Which brings us back to where the story began. To that Tokyo classroom in spring 1985. To an elderly teacher with silver hair and fire in her eyes, holding a length of rusted chain. The bell rang, but nobody moved. Remember this, Reiko said as her students finally began to gather their things. The strongest weapon is not bombs or guns, it's principles. It's choosing to stay human even when others become animals. It's treating enemies with dignity, not because they deserve it, but because you do. She picked up the dog tags, held them so the light caught the engraved letters. That's what defeated Japan, not American firepower, American principles, and that's what will build the future, not more war, but more mercy. 13 years later, in 1998, Reiko Fujimura lay in a hospital bed in Tokyo. She was 73 years old. Cancer had finally caught up with her. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, 3 generations all shaped by the story she had told. Grandmother, her oldest granddaughter said, holding her hand, what should we do with your things, the chain, the dog tags? Reiko's voice was weak but clear. Donate them to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. Let them teach when I no longer can. She looked at each of her family members. Remember what I taught you. America defeated us with bombs and soldiers, but they won us over with principles and dignity. Never forget that difference. Build your lives on principles, not power. Choose humanity over hatred. Her granddaughter asked quietly, how do you want to be remembered? Reiko smiled, though it cost her considerable effort. As someone who learned, who changed, who was brave enough to admit when she was wrong and strong enough to build something better. She closed her eyes, the dog tags clasped in her hand one final time. Tell them, keep telling them, never stop telling them. That's how peace survives, through the telling. Reiko Fujimura died peacefully that night, 2003, 5 years after Reiko's death. Her granddaughter was cleaning out the old family home in Tokyo. In the back of a closet, she found a small wooden box that had never been opened. Inside, a letter, yellowed, addressed to Reiko Fujimura. The postmark, San Antonio, Texas, 1998. The same year Reiko had died. The granddaughter opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, from a very old hand. She began to read, Dear Reiko, I am 99 years old now. The doctors say I won't see 100. I wanted you to know Tom and I talked about you every year on September 15th, the day he unlocked your chains. He said you were proof that mercy isn't wasted, that choosing principle over revenge could change the world. You kept your promise to David. You taught thousands of children that enemies can become friends, that hate doesn't have to win. Thank you for carrying my boy's memory. Thank you for making his death mean something. When you read this, I'll be gone, but I'll be with Tom and David, and we'll all be watching you teach. Keep telling them, Reiko. Keep telling them mercy is stronger than victory. With love, Sarah Hayes. The granddaughter checked the records. Sarah Hayes had died in April 1998. Reiko had died in June 1998. The letter had been written in March, but it had never been sent. Sarah had died before it could be mailed, and Reiko had died never knowing. The granddaughter brought the letter to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. They added it to the display. Now in a glass case, 3 items sit side by side: the rusted chain, the worn dog tags, and Sarah's unsent letter. The plaque beneath them reads, "In memory of Sergeant Thomas Hayes, 1903 to 1974, Private David Hayes, USMC, 1925 to 1945, Sarah Hayes, 1899 to 1998, Reiko Fujimura, 1925 to 1998, and all who chose mercy over revenge. You are not animals." September 15th, 1945. Every year, thousands of visitors stand before that display. Japanese students learning about their nation's history, American veterans remembering their service, people from every nation, every background, every belief. They look at the chains and dog tags and letter. They read the story, and they face the same question those 43 women faced in 1945. Do we hate or do we heal? Do we seek revenge or do we build bridges? Do we become animals or do we remain human? The choice always will be the chains that once bound us to hatred can become the very thing that sets us free.